Arthropod, invertebrate, insect, arachnid, bug. What do all of these things mean? What is an insect? What's happening? I have no idea. Okay, we're gonna go through it. Welcome back, everybody. Welcome to episode 34 of Bug of the Week. And I realized recently, I was like, what even is an insect? You know, I learned about this in one of my classes last semester, and I realized that people don't really talk about, like, what is the difference between insects, arachnids, invertebrates, arthropods, crustaceans. What do all of these things have in common? What's going on here? So I'd like to talk about that. But this is the first episode in a longer series that I figured I should go through, and that is going through all of the hexapod orders. So there are 33 hexapod orders that are alive today, and I wanted to go over each of them. Each of them are going to get their own video. I have done a few of them in the past on Bug of the Week, so we might skip a few of them. We're going to do all of them. And for this first one, I just wanted to introduce you guys to what an insect is. All right, so let's do this. So I first want to go over how scientists categorize certain living things. This is called taxonomy. So taxonomy is the study of categorizing different animals into groups where they are evolutionarily related. So when I say taxonomy, if I say family, I said orders a minute ago. That's one of the groups in taxonomy. Genus, species, these are all taxonomic terms. So what do all of them mean? Basically, every level in taxonomy gets more and more specific the more that you go down. So it goes domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and then finally species. And within there are subfamily, subgenus, subphylum. There's all these weird terms, but for the most part, let's just focus on those main ones. So think of it like a filtering process. The top one is domain. So that is super, super broad. And the more you go down, the more specific it gets. It sort of funnels itself down until you get to the genus and the species level. Now, when I give you a big scientific name like this one, first word is going to be the genus, and it's going to be capitalized. And then the second word is going to be the species, and it is going to be lowercase. So, for example, Homo sapiens, that's humans. Our scientific name is Homo sapiens. So our genus is Homo and our species is sapiens. So when a scientist uses a scientific name, that's what they're referring to, is the genus and the species at the same time. Okay, so just like the way that taxonomy goes from broad to specific, I'm going to start really broad. This is a phylogeny, and this is how we illustrate the relatedness between different living things. So if you notice, if you trace it all the way back, they all branch at one point. So basically, this chart illustrates how certain things are related over evolutionary time. And this phylogeny specifically is for the phylum Arthropoda, or the arthropods. So what even is an arthropod? Arthropods are this very large group of invertebrates, meaning they don't have backbones. And arthropods have a couple special characteristics. Number one, they have paired jointed appendages, meaning they will never have an odd number of legs. They also have a segmented body plan, meaning there are multiple segments of their body that join together to create the body shape. So for example, for an insect, let's say, it has three segments: the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. So although not all arthropods have those same three segments, generally they do have a segmented body in some way. And number three, and I would say most importantly, is arthropods have a hardened exoskeleton, and these exoskeletons are made of a very interesting material called chitin. So chitin is a really cool material that is found in the exoskeleton of arthropods, as well as the cell walls of fungi, which is pretty interesting. But yeah, chitin is really cool because it's very strong yet adaptable. It is made of these little rods, these little fibers that cross-link with each other and form kind of lattice shape. So it forms a lattice, but then it's in layers. So there are many layers of this lattice. And the interesting thing, it's layered, thousands of layers, and each layer is slightly biased. It's slightly rotated to a point where a molecule of chitin forms a helicoid shape. These helicoids then are stacked next to each other side by side throughout the matrix of the exoskeleton of the arthropod, forming a complex matrix of chitin. The important thing about this is that there is no single point of weakness on the exoskeleton of an arthropod because of the way that these molecules are arranged. And this is one of the key factors that played into the success of the arthropods. One of the things, if not the most important thing that unifies all of Arthropoda, is the chitinous exoskeleton. So you might be asking yourself, what does this include and what does it not include? I will tell you what it does include. This is all of crustaceans, arachnids, insects, hexapods, myriapods, ticks, mites, scorpions, lobsters, crabs, barnacles, shrimp, daphnia. So what are the closest living relatives to the Arthropoda? And that would be namely tardigrada, which are the water bears, which I've done another bug of the week video about, as well as Onychophora, otherwise known as the velvet worms, which I've also made a bug of the week video about. Neither of them are bugs, but they are their own phylums. They're really cool, but they don't have that important exoskeleton that I talked about. So those are the closest living relatives. So what does Arthropoda not include? Well, one thing that might really surprise you, Arthropoda does not include worms. Worms are hardly related to insects at all. So that's segmented worms, roundworms, flatworms. All of the worms are their own thing. All mollusks, so sea sponges, sea slugs, land slugs, snails, all of those things are their own thing called mollusca. Completely different from Arthropoda. They lack that exoskeleton. They lack appendages. They're very different. But this is important to think about because a lot of people think about those as bugs, and that's just not true. Actually, it's not a bug. It's a mollusca. Anyway, with Arthropoda out of the way, let's dive into the phylum a little bit more. How is it divided? How are things related? And when do the insects come in? Okay, so if you see at the beginning, arthropods branch two separate ways in very early on in the lineage, and that you can see that in red, and then the rest of them. In red is called Chelicerata. So remember I was talking about kingdom, phylum, class, order. Arthropoda is the phylum. Chelicerata is a subphylum. So I know it's very confusing. In your brain, it should be a class. Not a class. I'm sorry to tell you that. The thing about science is things get changed all the time, and they need to be moved around in such a way that fits, and that also fits the way that we've been talking about things in the past. So I'm sure at some point there was a change in the phylogeny. That's why Chelicerata is a subphylum and not its own class. Yeah, so that one at the top, Pycnogonida, the sea spiders. They're not spiders, I know. Yeah, English names suck. These are each their own group. So, Pycnogonida, the sea spiders. There's also Acheriformes, those are the mites. Sulfugi, those are the camel spiders, which I've also done a bug of the week about. There's Scorpiones. There's my favorite, Amplipigi. Boom. Right here, obviously my favorite. Yeah, so these are all Chelicerata were described because they all came from a common ancestor, and I believe it's the genetic aspect, but they also all have similar chewing mouth parts called chelicera. They have little appendages that they tear their food apart with. In spiders, that's where the fangs are attached. But yeah, if you look up there, you'll see Xiphosaura. Those are the horseshoe crabs. They're actually chelicerates. They're not crabs at all. Horseshoe crabs are really cool, and they're actually way more closely related to spiders than they are to crabs, which I'll get into in a minute. So yeah, those are the chelicerates. And then if you look at the right side of the graph, you'll see Chelicerata, and then you'll see Euchelicerata. So scientists found something that ruled out Pycnogonida as fitting into Euchelicerata. They found something that made Pycnogonida stand out from all of them. So there's a whole term for all of Chelicerata minus Pycnogonida. So that's, scientists are good at noticing patterns, and that's what they did there. So there are lots of things that make Chelicerata different from the rest of the clade that I'll talk about in a minute. Some of them are an inconsistent number of legs. So if we're thinking about insects, for example, they have 6 legs, whereas Chelicerata or the chelicerates have 8 or more, an inconsistent number of legs, right? Whereas all insects have 6 legs. Another big thing about the Chelicerata is their breathing structure. So we'll talk about that in a minute, but from insects, breathing is a lot different from Chelicerata. So the chelicerates actually have something that more closely resembles true lungs, and we call those book lungs. So they actually do breathe in air into one organ, similar to what vertebrates use, and we call those book lungs, and that is way different than all of the other arthropods. Okay, so that's enough about Chelicerata. Let's go into the rest of Arthropoda, which we call Mandibulata. So remember I said Chelicerata have those weird biting appendages. So if you think about insects, for example, I keep saying insects because that's what I'm familiar with. If you think about insects, they have a kind of mandible, right? So they have true mandibles. So if you think about crabs, insects, those all have true mandibles. So within Mandibulata, you have the rest of arthropods, which include Myriapoda, which include all of those things in green. So millipedes, centipedes, those kinds of things. And now is when we get into the weird stuff. Pancrustacea. Okay, so I'm sure you've heard the term crustaceans, crustacea, and crustaceans as a whole is a very outdated term at this point, because what the heck is a crustacean anyway? I'm curious. Leave in the comments what you would say a crustacean is. Because if you think about it, nobody really knows. So if you think of crustaceans, you'd probably think of crabs and lobsters, right? A lot of people would say, you would think of crustaceans as living in the ocean, okay? That makes sense to me. But the problem with that is there are lots of things within groups in crustaceans that actually live on land. Coconut crabs. These things are all technically crabs, but they live on land. They don't go into the ocean. Another thing about that is there are lots of freshwater crustaceans, right? So you go to the lake, you might find little crabs or little freshwater shrimp, right? There's lots of, crawdads, crayfish. These are all freshwater crustaceans. So what is happening? Well, basically, we decided as scientists that the term crustacean needs to die because it makes no sense. A more correct term now that we would use would be pancrustacea. You can see that outlined on the right, and you'll see that it includes insects. So insects are actually crustaceans. More correctly, members of pancrustacea. But my point is pancrustacea includes crabs, it includes lobsters, it includes insects, it includes springtails, it includes barnacles, it includes sand fleas, Daphnia. So it's a similar issue to fishes. In recent years in biology, a lot of people have realized that nobody can really define what a fish is, right? And if you think about it, fish are egg-laying vertebrates that have gills. Well, that doesn't work, right? Because I'm going to give you one word. Frogs. Frogs are vertebrates that lay eggs that have gills in their adolescent stage. So what the heck is a fish? Nobody really knows. So things like this is why biology and science are so interesting to me, and trying to explain the evolutionary relationships between things is really interesting, how that always changes and is always changing how we look at things. So in conclusion, nobody really knows if we're doing anything right. This is our current best guess as to how things are related, but it's always changing. So pancrustacea is a prime example of things changing. Oh yes, I do want to clarify one thing. That is, if something has diverged from something else, that thing is still part of that group. So for example, insects are crustaceans. Insects are arthropods. But you can't say that arthropods are insects because there are lots of arthropods that are not insects. So you can say that birds are dinosaurs, but you can't say that dinosaurs are birds, right? Because we know that lots of dinosaurs were alive that were not birds. So basically, if you take a smaller group within a larger group, you can say that the smaller group is that larger group, but not that the larger group is that smaller group, if that makes any sense. So finally, what we've all been waiting for is Hexapoda. Hexapoda is what I have devoted my life to, I guess, at this point. Hexapoda includes insecta and 3 non-insect hexapods. So, what is a hexapod? A hexapod is this diverged group from the rest of Arthropoda, and the main thing about Hexapoda is they all have 6 legs, 3 pairs of legs, hence the name Hexapoda, right? Hex, 6 legs. So, you might be asking yourself, why is there Insecta and then these 3 other ones? Why aren't they insects? Protura, Collembola, and Diplura are not considered insects, even though they all have 6 legs. I'm going to make a video on each of these and then all of the insects. Like I said a minute ago, I'm going to make a video on each of the hexapod orders. But without spoiling those episodes, I want to say, yes, they all do have 6 legs, but there's a couple really important features about these 3 basal hexapod orders that differentiate them from insects. I'll give you 2 of them in this episode, and it is mostly to do with their mouth parts. So Protura, Collembola, and Diplura all have endognathous mouth parts, meaning their mouth parts are inside of their body or inside of their head. And so that's one of the big differences between insects and those 3 basal orders, is that those 3 orders have mouth parts on the inside, which is very different from insects. Another big thing is their development. I'm going to talk about this a little more in the future, and I have a little bit in the past, but there are 3 main types of development in hexapods. Insects are either holometabolous or hemimetabolous, meaning they either go through a complex metamorphosis, like a butterfly or a beetle, or they go through a nymphal stage, so they molt through their nymphal stages up into an adult. Something that's different about these 3 basal hexapod orders is that they all have a third one that insects do not have, and this is called ametabolous, meaning they don't have a nymphal stage. They're born out of the egg as a little tiny baby, basically a shrunken down version of the adult. They look the same, they've got all of their organs except for their reproductive organs, and then they molt through their life, reaching adulthood, and they then, with that last molt, they now have their reproductive organs. Third, and I would say most important part that I really want to emphasize, is wings. So a really important uniting thing that made insects the most successful group of animals on planet Earth is the fact that they have wings. So these 3 basal groups do not have wings. Wings evolved in insects and in insects only. None of these other arthropods have wings. Wings are one of the main reasons that insects have become so successful. And you might be thinking, Braden, aren't there some bugs that don't have wings? Yes and no. The one you're probably thinking of is ants. Worker ants do not have wings. But we do say that ants have wings because the reproductive individuals of ants have wings. So when queens go out to mate and males go out to mate, they have wings. So yeah, most insects have wings. There are a few exceptions, as always, with insects. As you will learn, there's always an exception in insects. So there are some insects that do not have wings, namely the fleas. Fleas do not have wings. Next would be the true lice, the lice in your head. They don't have wings. So sure, those insects don't have wings. But the key here is that it is thought that these insects, the fleas and the true lice mainly, ancestrally had wings. So they don't have wings today, but they've since lost those wings. So if you think about the lifestyles of both of those insects, what do they have in common? That is that they are external parasites of mammals or birds, right? Things that have hair or feathers. It would be really hard to scurry around hair if you have wings. So what we say about insects is that all insects ancestrally have wings, But those 3 basal hexapod orders do not have wings. Their ancestors did not have wings. So, to sum that all up, those 3 non-insect hexapods are not insects because, number 1, they have endognathous mouth parts. Number 2, they have a different kind of development called ametabolous development. Number 3, and I would say most importantly, is that none of these 3 lineages have wings. So one last thing I want to actually mention is, if you look at this tree, the closest living relative to the hexapods is the Remipedia, or the Remipedes. Remipedes are pretty cool. I don't really know much about them, but I could do an episode on them if you guys want. I know they're not bugs, but honestly, we don't follow the names of these series anymore. So if you learned anything from this episode, it is that, number 1, nobody knows what a crustacean even is. Insects are actually very, very, very distantly related to spiders. They're more closely related to crabs and millipedes. And number 3, worms, slugs, all those things that you think of as bugs are in a completely different stratosphere from what you could consider a bug. Anyways, you guys, thank you so much for watching. If you made it this far, definitely make sure to leave a like, subscribe, comment your favorite part if you learned anything, share this video with a friend. I'm super excited about this series. We're going to go over each of the insect orders, and a lot of these orders I didn't even know existed until I got to school. So I'm excited to tell you guys all about my new favorite ones, and I hope you follow along for that journey. I'm super excited to tell you guys all about it. I will see you all next week. My name is Bradon. This was another episode of Bug of the Week. I will see you all next week, but until then, keep on bugging. See ya.